In this edition of Locked On Capitals, Game 1 starts tonight as your Washington Capitals take on the Boston Bruins. And this is a special crossover edition of Locked On Capitals and Locked On Bruins as we give you our thoughts on the game tonight. We'll talk about all of that and more next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, and I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. And when you're on YouTube, make sure and hit that subscribe button, and if you like the videos, give it a thumbs up. It really helps grow the channel. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition, I am joined by Ian McLaren, a special Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Bruins. I talk to Ian next.
The Boston Bruins and the Washington Capitals open up their 2022-23 regular season schedules tonight in Washington. And it's a special Locked On crossover edition with myself, Ian McLaren, host of Locked On Boston Bruins, and Dan Holme, the host of Locked On Washington Capitals, as we break down everything you need to know about both teams heading into puck drop tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. How's it going, Dan? Nice to chat with you this morning.
It's great. It's game day. It's game one of the season. What's not to love? Hockey is here, and all is right in the world.
Exactly. Yeah, there was a couple pretty entertaining games last night. The kind of unofficial start to the season after a couple games over in Europe over the weekend. Rangers, Golden Knights, both winning last night. They both looked pretty good, and we'll both get a look at our respective teams here this evening. Now, I wanted to ask you about a couple of key injuries for the Capitals to start the season. The Bruins, there's been a lot talked about Charlie McAvoy being out of the lineup, Brad Marchand being out of the lineup to begin the season. But the Capitals will be missing a couple of key guys as well in Nicklas Backstrom, who, if I recall, was out of the lineup to begin last season as well, and also Tom Wilson. What's the significance of those two injuries, and what kind of contingencies do the Capitals have in place to kind of not replace them, because you can't really replace those two guys, but to kind of keep things afloat in their absence?
So, the biggest one I would say is Nick Backstrom. Nick Backstrom had that hip resurfacing procedure done. He is supposed to miss a lion's share of this season, if not all of this season. So the Caps and Brian McClellan went out and picked up Dylan Strome to fill in on that second line center. And so far, so good with him. But, the big thing with Nick Backstrom is he plays such an integral part of this team. Backstrom has assisted on 274 of Ovechkin's career goals. So, oftentimes those two don't play together anymore. It's Kuzi on that top line, but you got to think to a certain extent that Alex Ovechkin is going to be a little bummed, shall we say, that his right-hand man isn't there. And then the other big one is Tom Wilson. I know around the league he's seen as kind of a goon, but he's also a legitimate goal scorer, 20-plus goals last season. They went out and picked up Connor Brown from the Ottawa Senators. Not an apples for apples comparison, because Connor Brown doesn't have that big bulking frame and that intimidation factor. But Connor Brown is good on the penalty kill, and we're already starting to see good chemistry between Dylan Strome and Connor Brown.
Yeah, very cool. I was pretty high on Dylan Strome last season, wanting the Bruins to kind of make a trade for him or even sign him in free agency. I thought that was a pretty savvy pickup for the Capitals. I have him on a fantasy league keeper team as an aside, so I'm hoping that he gets off to a pretty hot start for the Capitals as well. Last year for the Bruins, we had a new goalie in Linus Ullmark. coming over from Buffalo, new city, new system, new coach, new teammates, everything. And it took him a little bit of time to kind of get acclimated to everything. The Capitals moving on from Ilya Samsonov and Vitek Vanacek, going with Stanley Cup champion Darcy Kemper, who will be the starter mostly, I would assume. I wouldn't expect it would be a split with Charlie Lindgren, I believe, is the backup. Do you see or anticipate a bit of a rolling start perhaps for Kemper as he comes off the high of winning the Cup and adjusts to a new situation in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, so with Darcy Kemper, he's never really carried the bulk of the mail for any of the teams that he's been on. Kemper stopped 36 of 39 against Columbus in the preseason. And then we all know about last season in 57 games, he went 37, 12, and 4 with a .921 save percentage, and then did really great in the Stanley Cup, of course. But, everyone says, well, can they get that same thing out of him on this Capitals team? Because we all know that he had the Avalanche in front of him. But Darcy Kemper, so far, what I've noticed, he is as advertised. He has played well. He is a bit prone to the injury bug, I guess would be one of my causes of concern. His lingering lower body issues have impacted his play last season. In 50 games, he's missed 50 games in the last 2 seasons. So, it does seem like it was a good move to pick up someone like Charlie Lindgren, someone that, if called upon, can step in and play a bigger role. And he's a bit of an unproven commodity because he has played primarily in the AHL. And he has done good in the AHL, but he might get thrust into more duty this year as, Kemper isn't used to playing as much as I think the Capitals would like to see him play.
Right. I'm wondering too about kind of maybe some players that have impressed in training camp or some guys that might be flying a bit under the radar in Washington that Bruins fans should keep an eye on tonight, or who could step up and help, uh, keep this team in a playoff spot in the top 4 in the Metropolitan Division. Any kind of breakout guys or guys we should keep an eye on tonight?
So a guy that came into camp on a mission is Alexi Protas. He kind of came in and he was hungry to play on this team. He had a brief stint last season, but he came in and has been playing very well. He's played in all the preseason games. And the good thing about these young players is they're more of like what I would call a Swiss Army knife. You can kind of put them in wherever and they don't really complain about it. Protas has played in all 3 forward spots, left wing, center, and right wing. And, when he's out there, he is a big bulking frame. He is 6'6", 235 pounds, 21 years old, played 33 games up with a big club last year, and just really kind of stood out, I would say, in training camp. And that is why he is still on the team now. There's a lot of guys, young guys, vying for positions on this team, and he was one of them along with Joe Snively. He made the team as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out, but Protas and Snively would be the big ones to look out for, along with more familiar names like Strome and Connor Brown. But you take a look at the team; it's an aging roster, a bit like the Bruins, and the Penguins. Kind of, reluctant to make these big changes. But I think that this is what we're going to go with through the Ovechkin era, and then I think after that you'll start to see more changes, integration of younger players into the lineup.
Right. And that leads well into my final question for you, which would be, do you see a risk of Washington falling out of the top 4 in the Metro, maybe falling out of the playoff picture with, say, the New Jersey Devils or the Blue Jackets are quite at that level, maybe the Islanders having a bit of a resurgence, or do you think the Capitals still firmly entrenched as a playoff team in the Eastern Conference?
So if you listen to the talking heads on the NHL Network, or you listen to NHL Network radio on Sirius XM, they've kind of slated them as a bubble team at best, and they're talking about that most likely because of the Backstrom and Wilson thing. But for me, they went out and solidified those positions with Strome and Brown, and then of course the netminding situation. I would like them to win, whatever it takes. They may be a bubble team, but I like to think they'll place a little bit higher. Everyone's thinking it's going to be Carolina or New York, but I think that this Capitals team will fight for them. My ultimate goal for them, of course, is a Stanley Cup. But if they cannot achieve that, I would like them to make it past the first round. They've been snake bitten since 2018. So just to have that would be a nice thing for me, just to finally
Yeah,
get over that hump.
I feel that.
All right, so after the break, I will talk to Ian about my questions for the Bruins. But first, the numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen Simply Safe Home Security to protect their home. You don't earn that trust of that many people without doing something right. At Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters. I know because I use Simply Safe in my own home. They protect you with cutting-edge security technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back. Here's why I love it. I had an issue where someone broke into my house and they dispatched the police and eliminated the situation. With 24/7 professional monitoring, Simply Safe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected and dispatch police or first responders in an emergency, even if you're not home or can't be reached. Simply Safe blankets your home in protection with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and outside your home, smarter ways to detect motion that only alerts you when a threat is real, and even hazards that instantly detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/lockedonnhl. Save 20% off your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplysafe.com/lockedonnhl to learn more. There's no safe like Simply Safe. All right, in this next segment, I am going to talk about the Bruins and what my questions are. There are quite a bit of questions. We talked about it a bit in the first segment there. How is this Bruins team going to do with out missing some integral players on the team? When the season begins, the Bruins will be without three key players: Brad Marchand, defenseman Charlie McAvoy, and Matt Grzelcyk. Talk to me about those injuries. Two huge players that everyone around the NHL, if you follow it, have heard those names. They're marquee names. Talk to me a little bit about the impact of those players on the Bruins and what it means in their absence.
I mean, yeah, you can't understate the value of a Brad Marchand and a Charlie McAvoy to the Boston Bruins. They're arguably top five, at least top 10 at their respective positions around the NHL. So the Bruins definitely going to be hard pressed to excel without them for the first 6-7 weeks of the season. They're both expected to be back around Thanksgiving or the beginning of December. Now, the Bruins were able to still solidify the top six in Marchand's absence by having David Krejci return and also acquiring Pavel Zacha from the New Jersey Devils. So even without Marchand, the top six still looks pretty good with Zacha playing with his fellow countrymen in Krejci and David Pastrnak. And then it looks like Taylor Hall will start the season on the top line with Patrice Bergeron and Jake DeBrusk. So still a pretty decent top six without Brad Marchand, and his return will just help the depth of this team and solidify the third line with bumping a guy down. On defense, it's a bit murkier for sure. The Bruins were pretty short on depth on the right side as it was, having a left-hand shot playing over there. It was McAvoy logging heavy minutes, and then Brandon Carlo, Connor Clifton behind him. Now, they did add Anton Stralman to training camp on a PTO. He has officially signed a one-year contract with the Bruins. He's a bit advanced in age. He logged heavy minutes for the Arizona Coyotes last season, which is no easy task, seeing how low they were in the standings. So I think there's still a bit left in the tank there. He's not going to replace Charlie McAvoy by any stretch of the imagination, but he can probably play some solid minutes alongside fellow Swede Hampus Lindholm. Just be solid in his own end, get the puck out. That's all he's going to be asked to do. So, like I said, it's going to be tough without those two guys, but there are contingencies in place to kind of keep them afloat, at least in their absences.
All right. So the other question I have is, will Pavel Zacha be more productive than he was in New Jersey? Talk to me a little bit about Pavel and your thoughts on him.
I think he's well positioned to improve on his production from the Devils. Last season, he didn't look as great. A year ago a couple of years ago in the COVID shortened year, I think it was his best kind of point per game rate. And I think the fact that he's playing on a 1-year deal with the Bruins, the fact that he's going to start at least with David Krejci and David Pastrnak, that line played one game together in the preseason and looked fairly dynamic against the New York Rangers. So I think alongside those guys that he's familiar with from, growing up in Czechia, he played with David Pastrnak in the past at the junior international level. He had already been working out in Boston in the off seasons over the past couple of years, so he knew some other guys like Charlie Coyle. He had a place in Boston, so I think it's a pretty good fit for him. I'm not expecting him to be like a point per game guy or anything like that, but it would be nice for him to, contribute maybe a 2020 season, 2025, 20 goals, 25 assists, meaning. Again, he'll probably have a bit of a lesser role when Marchand comes back, playing on the third line, presumably, but I think there's a reason he was drafted so highly in 2015, the infamous 2015 draft, and he seems to have fit in well so far with the Bruins. New head coach Jim Montgomery seems to be a fan, and that check line, I think, will be one to watch here in the early going for the Boston Bruins.
All right, so next, let's talk about the Achilles heel of the Boston Bruins, what that may be. For the Capitals last season, it was netminding. What do you perceive the Boston Bruins Achilles heel is heading into this season?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. I think they do have a solid goaltending tandem. Obviously, there's some questions on the blue line without Charlie McAvoy in the mix. I think it's really going to come down to their bottom six. And there's been a lot of talk in Boston through training camp, through the preseason, about whether they were going to go in a young direction with the bottom six, whether they were going to rely on some veteran guys like Nick Foligno, Chris Wagner, who both played okay in the preseason. As it looks right now, they're going to have a fourth line that consists of Nick Foligno, Thomas Nosek, and a youngster in Jacob Lauko, and rolling with Charlie Coyle, Craig Smith, and a newcomer in AJ Greer on the third line. So there's a bit of youth sprinkled in there, but if they can't get consistent production or efficient minutes from those more veteran bottom six guys that are chewing up a significant portion of the cap, then the Bruins will be in tough. I think their top six, especially when healthy, can stack up among some of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. But if they're just getting run ragged by deploying those third and fourth lines, then that could really come back to bite them. And the goaltending is going to have to be really solid in the early going without having Charlie McAvoy as a buffer to chew big minutes in front of them.
So the other big move that was made is moving on from head coach Cassidy for Montgomery. As an outsider, of course, I don't cover this team like you do. A bit of a head scratcher for me. I thought Cassidy did a good job. I think, he'll do the best with what he has out in Vegas. How much better is this Bruins team with Montgomery, or do you think they're better with Montgomery, or would they have been better with Cassidy? Fill us in, our Capitals listeners, on the coaching thing. Why do you think that went the way it went?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say if they're going to be a better team under Jim Montgomery. It's a pretty tough task to improve on Bruce Cassidy's regular season performance, at least. with the Boston Bruins. They were excellent at both ends of the ice. He had a very effective defensive system. There were some quibbles perhaps with how the offense ran. And the biggest issue was apparently how he related to some of the younger guys. He's already, there's a reason why he was picked up 9-10 days later by Vegas after being let go from the Bruins. He's an excellent coach. Jim Montgomery, he was pretty highly regarded when he went to Dallas. We all know the story of how he was let go. He really was very effective with the St. Louis Blues the last couple of years, especially kind of revamping their penalty kill. And he seems to be off to a pretty good start in terms of galvanizing the group, getting on the right page with some of the perhaps disillusioned younger guys, and embracing the leadership core that the Bruins have. So I think it's going to be tough to expect that Bruce Cassidy won a Jack Adams with the Bruins. Can Montgomery achieve that in his tenure? That remains to be seen. So that's a huge question that I have myself heading into the season, is how they're going to perform and what the Montgomery factor is going to be for this team.
All right, one final question of this segment. This game will be on TNT tonight, stateside. I want your predictions on the game. Of course, you cover the Bruins, so I think I know which way this is going. But let me hear your outcome, or what do you think are your predictions, rather, of tonight's game? What storylines are you looking for?
I mean, with no Marchand and no Wilson, I think there's been a bit of history between these two teams of some rough play. We all remember the Tom Wilson hit on Brandon Carlo a couple years ago. So perhaps not as much bad blood in the water as there might have been if those two guys were in there. I think we're going to see a pretty entertaining game. There's going to be a lot of, opening night. There's a lot of feeling out to begin, and then guys kind of settle in. These two teams always seem to play close games. It's probably going to be a 1-goal game. I'm going to err on the side of Boston and say they're going to take it 3-2 tonight over the Capitals, with Jeremy Swayman, who I presume will be a net, stepping up and having a pretty strong game. What about yourself?
Right.
How do you see this one playing out?
Well, for me, I think the storylines out there too, like you were talking about Wilson being out. I think that, it's going to factor who is going to be the sandpaper personality or the enforcer on the Capitals. I guess it remains to be seen if Protas, we know that Hathaway's a bit of a chirper, so maybe he will step in his absence. But I do think the Capitals will win this game, of course. But I guess we will see what happens a bit later tonight. All right, so after the break here, we will talk about our thoughts on what we think is going to happen, and as far as how many points, we'll talk about the point predictions for both of our teams. Do we think it's a little bit over or under what they're supposed to be? We'll talk about that next. All right, welcome back into this crossover edition of Locked On Bruins and Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. So in this segment, we are going to talk about, I'll ask you first about the Bruins, the points over and under. So, odds makers are already out there predicting where our respective teams are going to be. The Bruins, the prediction for them, are they over or under the points that they're projecting them to be?
Yeah, I believe the last time I looked I think it was 96.5 for the Bruins. That would be double-digit dip from last season. And I think there's reason to believe that they will be a bit down from last season because of the injuries. It's kind of going to be a tale of two seasons for the Bruins. There's going to be the Bruins without Marchand and McAvoy, and the Bruins once they return. I think once they return, they should be a better team than last season, at least on paper. But this early stages could be a struggle to gain as many points as possible. So I think they could still challenge for a 100-point season, especially in today's kind of 3-point game system where you pick up the loser point. So I'm gonna go on the over for them on 96.5, but I don't think it'll be much over than that, and the whether they can pick up some points early in the season will dictate kind of where they're able to rise to in the final standings.
So yeah, and then for the Capitals, for me, I know they've kind of pegged them a little bit lower this year, and they've done that in part because of the subtraction of Backstrom and Wilson from the lineup, and it's an aging core. We've heard all these things before, but I ultimately think they will overachieve. GM Brian McClellan went out and solidified the biggest positions, netminding, and the position with Backstrom and Wilson. So I think they're in a good position. They had 100 points last season. I do think that they should be on par for that, if not a little bit better than that. That's what I'm hoping for anyway. Tonight's going to be a good trial for both our teams. We saw what they had in the tank in preseason, and you can only judge that so much because, especially in the beginning stages, you're just dealing with AHLers essentially. So the rubber meets the road as the Capitals take on the Bruins tonight. I'm going to ask you a question here. My final question for you is I want you to look into your crystal ball here, Ian. And what is the future of the Boston Bruins? Where will they finish? And what are going to be some of the game changers that's either going to take them up or down? I know this is a prediction, but that's why I'm asking you your prediction for this year.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's so tough because of how difficult the Atlantic Division is. There was a real gap in the top four and the bottom four last season. I think that will be narrowed by these early season injuries for the Bruins and some improvements from the Senators and the Detroit Red Wings. Ultimately, they probably will finish in a wild card spot, fourth in the Atlantic, and then like you were saying about the Capitals, just wanting them to win a round. That's going to be tough for the Bruins if they have to play a Florida or a Toronto or even Tampa Bay. They were well positioned last year, I think, by being matched up with Carolina in the first round and getting into that Metropolitan bracket. If they could perhaps do that again, that would be beneficial to them. With Bergeron and Krejci, it's kind of a last dance situation. You want to think that they have the wherewithal to make a deep run, but we all know once you get to the postseason, really anything can happen, and it's incredibly difficult to win the Stanley Cup in this day and age. So, I could see them winning a round, maybe making it to the second round, but I don't know if this team is a Stanley Cup team at this point again this season. I'd like to hope so. It would be a great story, but it might be a pretty tough task in a pretty talented Eastern Conference for sure.
And, it does look like a pretty good Bruins team on paper. I know they have injuries, but that's a pretty common thread throughout all the teams in the NHL. My big thing for the Capitals is, like I said, to make it past that first round, if they can do that. Some of the big things to consider is if, in fact, they are going to get Backstrom back at some point this year.
Right.
And if he does come back, they're going to have to free up some money because of the long-term injured reserve money there. Also, the impact of Tom Wilson coming back to this team slated between Thanksgiving and Christmas, the impact there. So it's just going to be interesting, those things. And of course, there's the dreaded C word that I hate to bring up, COVID. I know that it's waning right now, but you never know what happens as we head into the fall or the winter.
Sure.
My fingers are crossed that everything goes fine. The one refreshing thing for me watching hockey is that it's full capacity. Everyone can go and things are back to normal for right now. So let's really hope this season that it stays that way and that the key players stay healthy. For me, it's Ovechkin staying in there so he can chase down Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky. But
for sure.
So, Ian, thanks so much for joining us on this crossover edition of Locked On Bruins and Locked On Capitals.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's been fun. Hopefully, we can connect at some point through the season. Where can people find your Capitals coverage? Where can people find Locked On Capitals this season?
So you can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. Of course, you can find the show wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube.
Yeah, and same with Locked On Bruins. You can find it on Twitter, Instagram at Locked NHL Bruins, and yeah, search up your podcast feeds for Locked On Bruins, Locked On Capitals, and we both recommend checking out the Locked On NHL podcast as well next, where you get a daily 30-minute update from our team of local experts on all things NHL all season long. All right, Dan, thanks again for taking some time to chat, and it's going to be a fun game tonight for sure. And good luck on a new season.
Yeah, good luck to you, except for tonight, of course. But thanks for doing this crossover.
No problem. Thank you, and take care, everybody. Have a great day, and Dan and I will talk to you again tomorrow on both Locked On Boston Bruins and Locked On Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your favorite team every single day.